Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I wish it was my pleasure to rise to speak on the Summary Offences Amendment to the Nazi Salute Prohibition Bill 2023. Unfortunately, it's a shame that we need legislation like this. It's a shame that people don't make the connection between absolute evil and hate and the symbolism that the Nazi salute represents. It really is a shame. I am grateful that now every member of Victoria Police will have provisions to act, but the fact that the symbols, the salute is still being used, and maybe the connection between the biggest atrocities of humankind ever is not made, is absolutely abhorrent. So the fact that this has come through this place today in the People's House of Democracy, I think speaks volumes. And I've been listening to all of the speakers today. The member for Northcote, the member for Monbulk in particular, talking about family history and also, my family history and my grandparents fleeing post-war World War II and the effect that had on their lives, their children's lives, and their grandchildren's lives. And even though my kids didn't have the chance, much like the member for Monbulk spoke about, didn't have the chance to hear the stories directly from those that saw what happened in post-World War II Europe. Education and making sure that we learn from this is really important. So the fact that, we can call them neo-Nazis, we can call them extremists, and I don't know what the thought process is that runs through their heads to dress in their black pyjamas and come to a House of Democracy and protest. I'm not quite sure what that is, but the fact that Victoria Police now have provisions to act and to prohibit that is very important. I do want to acknowledge the town of Beulah, as the member for Caulfield spoke about earlier. This all started largely in that small Mallee town of 312 people at the end of 2019-2020, when a flag flying Nazi symbols was flown in a backyard, highly visible to a Holocaust survivor. And the trauma that must have brought back for Peter, who has spoken about this in the past. Member for Caulfield has been in contact with Peter today, and we will go and pay him a visit. This largely started in that town of 312 people, and it's a beautiful town. Peter retired there, leaving Melbourne for a quiet retirement, and then was faced with that pretty much in his backyard. That's tragic. It's tragic. And at the time, there was an article in The Age that spoke about this incident. And I will quote from The Age article that said, Beulah Police have received multiple complaints. So it was the entire community came together. It was the whole town, it was the council, it was the Beulah Police. It was everyone in that town that was outraged, not only outraged, because we can all be outraged from time to time, but they were highly concerned with what flying that flag can mean. To follow on from that quote, Beulah Police have received multiple complaints from neighbours about the flag over the past fortnight. We are currently investigating and awaiting legal advice as to what, if any, offences have been committed, leading Senior Constable Shane Riggle said. What, if any, offences had occurred? At the time, he hadn't actually committed an offence, but it was the rallying and the voices of that small town, that beautiful town of Beulah, that actually, got that flag taken down, and Peter was actually able to walk outside again. The fact that we now have provisions to act is really important. I do want to touch on The member for Malvern's amendment, of course, replacing the words used by with the words associated with. And this is actually really important to me because a couple of weeks ago, actually it was a month ago after the last sitting week, when I got home after my 5-hour drive home after last sitting week and we were discussing this in the backyard with a couple of friends, we got into quite a robust discussion. I don't want to say an argument, but a robust discussion that almost led to the ejection of one of our friends from our house and our life because he couldn't quite understand what it meant. So used by the Nazis, and he was talking about the symbols used by, but where does it stop? And that's really broad. And although I argued for a couple of hours, quite frankly, this amendment actually puts that in a much tighter shell. So associated with the Nazis and the evil and the hate that carried certainly brings it together a lot more and makes it much more succinct. So I hope, and after listening to everyone speak on this bill today, I would hope that that amendment is supported because it is actually really important, especially when you are faced with, and don't get me wrong, this person that I was arguing with is not a bad person, they're not an evil person, they're not a person filled with hate at all. There's someone that is of Aboriginal background that's been subjected to and knows very well the extent of discrimination, of racism and all that stuff, but he was just concerned about what the term used by meant and where the parameters were for that. Which is a valid point. Hindsight's always 20/20, so when you look back on it, there is a valid point there, and I think this amendment covers that. So the wording of the member for Malvern's amendment does narrow that argument somewhat. I did want to keep my contribution brief today. That hasn't occurred. What a surprise. But I did really want to acknowledge the township of Beulah in the Mallee because I know that this has been a source of attention for the town, 3.5 years ago, that they probably didn't want. But they felt the need, the council, the police members and the general community, because out in the Mallee, where towns are an hour or so apart, the community is all you've got. And if you don't stick together, then division can occur. And division is felt in a town of 312 people, give or take, depending on the seasons. When division occurs, it's felt most acutely. So they deserve recognition for this bill coming through this place today. They really do. And Peter, although he's in his 90s, his survival and his relocation to Beulah, I know has had a profound impact, not just on that Mallee town, but on the entire state now with the symbol Prohibition and now the Nazi salute Prohibition 2023. So I commend this bill and the amendment to the House.